Okay, so now you're going to be moving on to your tables assignment. So this is about the tables assignment, which is the sort of precursor to the actual paper. This is the basis of the analysis to make sure you have a good analysis, to make sure you know you're going in the right direction, to make sure you have this key information ready to go, so that when you actually write your paper, you can just port in this information, you know, to create it or discover that you made some sort of fundamental mistake that you have to do everything from scratch at the last minute. Tables assignment is going to cover 3 basic tables. It's best to make these tables in Word and submit the assignment as a Word file. That way, when you write your paper, you can just copy and paste these tables you've already made into your file, into your actual paper. First is descriptive statistics. It is, in addition to each of the variable names, your 1 dependent variable and your 3 independent variables. For each one of those 4 variables, you will need the mean, the median, the standard deviation, the min, the max, and the number of observations you're working with. So just those 6 things, plus of course, you know, the label, the name. Regression, straightforward as well. You should just have the, I have to add the variables, the coefficient for each variable, the p-value for each variable, the number of observations you have for the regression, as well as the R-squared, adjusted R-squared, F-stat, and significance F. You know, to tell you how good the regression is as a whole, to tell you how the value of each of your each of your independent variables. Okay, and then finally we have the correlation table. Correlation table is of course there to show that there is no multicollinearity. So if you do have multicollinearity when you do this, this is again, that's a sign where you need to rethink, or you need to remove one of your variables and substitute it in for a different one, so you no longer have multicollinearity. So the multicollinearity, again, reminder, is just if the absolute value of the correlation coefficient is greater than 0.8. It's sort of our standard arbitrary threshold. Because multicollinearity only deals with a high correlation among your independent variables, do not include your dependent variable in your correlation table. If you do, it looks like you don't know why you have your correlation table there in the first place. Multicollinearity is only about the independent variables, not about the dependent one. So don't put the dependent one here. So this base information, this is really straightforward. The thing that people tend to screw up when they do this assignment is that they make things look really stupid, to put it lightly. The information is straightforward enough. You can go into Excel, you can create it. But like one thing people will do when they do the descriptive stats is they will see there is a descriptive stats option for data analysis, and they will just copy and paste that descriptive stats into a Word and then say they're done. But the problem is the descriptive stats, the output that it gives you a whole bunch of stuff you don't need. It'll give you like the kurtosis, you know, for example. So in the skew and a bunch of other things. You don't need that. Right? Remember, this paper cannot be more than 3 pages long. And so you are going to want ways to make sure that you don't take up more room than you need. When I list those mean, median, standard deviation, min, max, n, those 6 things, plus the variable names, I guess it's 7, you don't want any more than that because that's taking up space otherwise. Right. You often have to think in terms of presentation. You want it tight, and you also want it informative. So let's go over some of the common mistakes once you avoid it, right? Because here are some common mistakes I see. Let's go through them to make sure that you don't make them. Right. One, as I mentioned, don't put unnecessary information in it. You only have so much space. In fact, that's going to be a big theme. Right? When I talk about that these tables have to look nice, and that's something that's also required, not just the information, but they look nice. That's going to be a big theme, is making sure things look nice, making sure it's tight, making sure it doesn't take up any unnecessary space. So Don't put unnecessary information in. Don't have too many decimal places. So people will like check what the correlation coefficient is, and of course I'll put like correlation coefficient out to like 10 decimal places, and they'll put 10 decimal places in. It's huge, right? That many decimal places takes up a lot. It's kind of unreadable. It's not necessary. Max 4 decimal places. Absolute max. Typically max 4 decimal places for p-values. Right? Context matters. If you're doing like looking at average income, you really don't need any decimal places. So think about the context, but like don't put in like 10 or 12 decimal places. That takes up a lot of room. It looks ugly. It's hard to read. It's not necessary. Don't do that. I see this a lot. Don't have really long variable names. So a lot of the variable names in the data sets that I provide have kind of long, awkward names just because that's where I order them in. So don't mindlessly copy those. Give them something that is descriptive. Keep in mind the reason why these are so long and complicated is because there's so many variables, and so we have to be able to easily distinguish one from the other. But you don't need to have a very long name of expenditures per student, a whole long thing, because when you put that in a table, it's going to be this wide, and then the actual information is going to be this wide, and so then you have a lot of blank space right here that you don't want to do. You don't want to do that. Right? Make the variable names short and tight, nothing too long or awkward. Double space your tables. Do not do that. You should double space your actual paper, because that's standard for college work, double space your paper. But don't double space your paper, your actual tables. It looks weird, it takes up extra space, it's not really necessary. Don't do that. It's just a waste of space. Also make sure to put commas in if you need to. So if you're looking at something where the average is like 100,000, you should put in a comma to make it clear it's 100,000. Right. Anything certainly like, if it's like an SAT score average, that's usually not a big deal. But certainly if you're getting into the 5-digit territory, put a comma in, please. Finally, make sure all of your observations match up. So remember, your descriptive statistics and your correlation table are going to be based off of the data that you use for the regression. And for some data, especially in the country level data, there's a lot of missing observations. You don't want an average based on a bunch of observations that you end up having to eliminate because in some other variable there's a bunch of missing data. You want to clean the data and make sure that you only have the observations you'll actually be using when you do your regression. And then use that data to find your descriptive statistics. Right? In other words, all of your ends should match. You should have the same number of observations for all of your descriptive variables, or your descriptive statistics for all your variables. Like if it's 70, it should be 70 across the board, and then it should be 70 in your regression. Everything has to match. Make sure you do that because otherwise your descriptive statistics aren't really descriptive of the data you're using. Your correlation table, your correlation coefficients aren't really descriptive of the variables you're using, of the data you're using, because you're only using some of that data. So keep these rules in mind and make sure that things look nice, that they're easily readable, that you've hit all the things that you need, and that you don't have any extra stuff. Thanks.